Welcome back to the show, everybody. Guess what? SEC versus Ripple. Summary judgment motions due Monday. They were filed last night from the SEC and Ripple, and we got it for you today. Somebody roll that beautiful intro.
Digital Perspectives with Brad Kimes. Come on in.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. You can follow us on TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook for exclusive content. Right now, it's $1.7 trillion for the crypto market cap. Give CoinPeprico a follow. Bitcoin right now, 19,900 plus. Boy, am I excited. Ethereum, 1,400 plus. XRP, 37 cents this morning. We're up 6.8% on the 7-day and 2.4% on the 24-hour. Ladies and gentlemen, not financial advice. You can get Ripple while it's still available. We're going to go over summary judgment filings today. I don't know which way this thing goes. Settlement, ruling, who knows? But what I do know is we're getting into the last chapter of this case, however you slice it. And if you want to get Ripple before they end up having a public exit at some point, whenever that may be, this is the place to do it. And there's a million other great products on there too. So don't mess around and check it out. Link2.com, link underneath the video. Shout out to James K. File and Jim. We are so grateful for you, Fred Rispoli and Bill Belisarius, certainly John Deaton, the general of the XRP army out here, and attorney Jeremy Hogan and everybody else who's contributed in this case up until now. And breaking as of last evening, the SEC filed its motion for summary judgment, and so did Ripple. I tell you, we're going to talk about that, but let's go ahead and focus on this because listen, there's a lot of case law cited in these things, and it is just like, whoa, completely overwhelming. Certainly someone like myself who is not a lawyer. But I tell you, I did look at it long enough to know this. When I go through this, I want to go through the table of contents very quickly with you so you can see the kind of topics that are broken down. I mean, all of us can understand that, right? So we see the registration provisions of the SEC. This is the SEC's filing. We will go to Ripple's in just a moment here, but I want to go through this. Background, Ripple founders created XRP and the XRP ledger, which we know was created before the company. I'm not going to dispute all these, but just read them. Defendants received warnings the XRP offers and sales could be investment contracts under Howey. Ripple needed to monetize its large XRP stake to fund its ambitious business plans of finding a use case for XRP. Ripple and Larson create XRP trading markets. From the start, Ripple offered XRP as an investment in Ripple's ambitious upcoming efforts and expertise. Ripple seeds a market for XRP and begins selling XRP, It says here, defendants marketed a purchase of XRP as an investment to a common enterprise. It says here, defendants and XRP investors' financial interests have always been aligned. Defendants repeatedly touted their common interests with XRP purchases. Defendants publicized their efforts to lock up certain XRP holdings. Proof of Ripple's stewardship of XRP in common interest with investors. Defendants told investors to view XRP as an investment, which they didn't, obviously. That could be profitable based on Ripple's promised managerial efforts. Defendants touted XRP as an investment in Ripple's efforts to find an XRP use and touted XRP price increases as proof that Ripple was succeeding. Defendants promised they would remain committed to undertaking efforts to find a use case for XRP. Defendants invited investors to speculate that Ripple's efforts could lead to an increased XRP's price. Defendants often touted XRP price increase. Defendants used XRP's rising price as proof to success of Ripple's efforts. Targeting speculators, defendants made and touted other significant efforts to increase protect liquidity of XRP markets, and so on and so on and so on. You get all of this. They're laying out and making the case that they sold over the 1.5 billion of XRP in speculative investors, which is all of us, they're saying, right? It goes through and continues to lay out the roadmap on this. I'm not going to go through the rest of it, but you get the idea of it. But what I did want to show you is this. There it is. They reference on page 47, Reves versus Ernst & Young. Now, they reference hundreds of case law, but this is an important one, as they all are to their argument, but this is an important one here, and this is the SEC summary judgment. And if we go into that case law, what do we find out? The citing in that case law is set right here, and I'm going to give it to you here because this is what I scalped out for you. The SEC cites the Reves test in their summary judgment on page 47 in what appears to be a catch-all to broad brush XRP as a security. Question: why did both parties file a day early, coordinated together, and what else are they doing together? Settlement talks? Maybe? I don't know. But when I look at this, let's go into what it cites. And just to be clear, this is what's cited inside of that filing of summary judgment, 494, 56, 60 through 1, 1990, right? Well, this is what they're citing, 494 right here, 56. So you go through, they're talking about uncollateralized, uninsured promissory notes. How long have we been talking about this? Payable on demand by the holder, offered by the co-op in this case, which is talking about a farmers cooperative of Arkansas and Oklahoma, as case law, right? Marketed as investment program, the notes paid a variable interest rate higher than the local financial institutions. It says here, holders of the notes filed suit at the district court against the co-op's auditor. It goes through and talk about here, which regulates certain specified notes under the Securities 1934 Exchange Act. It says here, certain specified instruments, including any notes and Arkansas securities laws, by intentionally failing to follow the generally accepted accounting principles, would have made the co-op's insolvency apparent to the potential note purchasers. This is what they're referring to as case law for all of this, right? It goes on to say here, applying the test created by Howey here, determine whether an instrument is an investment contract to the determination whether the co-op's instruments were notes. The court held that the notes were not securities in 1934 Act of Arkansas. It says here, and the statute's anti-fraud provisions therefore did not apply. Held the demand notes issued by the co-op fall under the note category, instruments that are securities. Congress' purpose in enacting the securities law was regulated investments form they are made and by whatever name they are called. However, notes are used in a variety of settings, not all which involve instruments. Thus, they are not securities per se, but must be defined using the family resemblance test. It's citing every single thing that we've gone over here, ladies and gentlemen. A note is presumed to be a security unless it bears a strong resemblance to the family resemblance test, which would discount it as a security, but remain as a note itself, right? So keep that in mind as we move forward here, ladies and gentlemen. Keep that in mind. And here it is cited right here in the case law table of contents here. Page 47 is where it's referenced if you want to take a look for yourself. So let's continue to move forward. Brad Garlinghouse comments here, and so does Stuart Alderati. First, Stuart Alderati says, my hot take, after 2 years of litigation, the SEC is unable to identify any contract for investment. That's what the statute requires, and cannot satisfy a single prong of the Supreme Court's Howey test. Everything else is just noise. Brad Garlinghouse comes behind it and says today's filing makes clear the SEC isn't interested in applying the law. They want to remake it all in an impermissible effort to expand their jurisdiction far beyond the authority granted to them by Congress. Well said by both of those gentlemen. Now let's take a look at this, because this is the SEC versus Ripple. Now breaking: Ripple Labs, Brad Garlinghouse, Chris Larson file motion for summary judgment seeking judgment as a matter of law. And here, if you go through this, I will tell you it does, and I've skimmed through this already, and I will tell you it does feel pretty sleepy. It's not anything in here that I've found thus to this point, and I will go through this, I'm sure, several more times, and I'm excited, more importantly, to hear John Deaton's take on it tonight, which you will get to hear tonight, and I'm going to tell you when and with who. And you're going to also get a attorney Jeremy Hogan legal briefs video either tonight or by tomorrow. So make sure you keep a lookout for those as well. I cannot wait. Now, here are some non-lawyer thoughts, which I thought were fantastic here from Ratha Conman. He says, Ripple spills a lot of ink establishing prior definitions of investment contracts that the Howey relies on to limit SEC overreach and the ambiguity of the phrase. He goes on to show this section here, which you can see. Now, I'm going to move through because it's a nice thread he's got. And shout out to Ratha Conman for this. Legal docs are intimidating, but the table of contents is pretty clear. And I would agree. Ripple's arguments has two main points. There are no investment contracts. Nothing meets the Howey test. Everything else is supporting argumentation. Yeah, Stuart Alderati did say it plainly. We shared that with you. He says, so it's a methodical explication of XRP sales were not investment contracts, the way the law defined them before Howey, on which Howey relies. It seeks to define Howey precisely to limit the SEC's ability to interpret however they want. It says here, you might have hoped Hinman's nonsense would be skewered, but that's a different matter about fair notice. This motion is about XRP status, about investment contracts and the Howey test as a category, or as categories, and whether the whole thing can be dismissed because nothing applies. Moving on, it's interesting that Ripple X grants giveaways figure into the argument in a couple of places because there were no purchases nor investments by the recipients. Oh, you don't say. You don't say. Non-cash agreements, is it? Yeah, thanks for highlighting that there, Ratha Conman. Yeah, I believe we've talked about that before. The XRP just appeared on the market with no money changing hands, no investment contracts. He says a lot also rides on crypto exchanges too. Why? Because people bought XRP from the exchanges, not Ripple. This serves any Ripple contract or any Ripple contract or expectations. The other argument about exchanges is that many are overseas and XRP sales were therefore outside the U.S. securities law. It's interesting that the SEC doesn't target sales just to exchanges, which but might be more convincing instead of going after everything, the lawyer stuff, I guess. And then he says here, there's some heavy lifting in the section. Ripple argues public things executives have said do not constitute promise of profits. This includes thorny statements about liquidity, building the network, etc. But again, there were no contracts which claims or rights involved here. And then it says, he highlights it in this as well, right? So I'm not going to, it's pretty straight ahead. Like, I mean, there's nothing that really kind of jumped out at me like, oh, that's a big one, right? But it's nothing that I felt like, was just kind of like, it was very mild. And I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so, we're going to wait and hold judgment from John Deaton and others, but I believe they've remarked in the same, and you'll hear from them in a second. In general, these arguments we've read earlier, only in more detail, and I assume refined. I don't anticipate the judge will dismiss the case, though, as these definitions need to be argued in trial for that reason. Don't think the SEC motion carries either. Absolutely. I think it was a great observation. And I do love this, by the way. He says, some observations anyways, take them with a grain of salt. I'm not a lawyer, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express once. Shout out to Ratha Conman on that one. This guy may have stayed at a Holiday Inn Express once, but he is a lawyer. He says the SEC failed to get on the record that any XRP purchaser heard Ripple's alleged marketing pitch, a big problem because it has the burden to prove everything here. And of course, a lot of other stuff, which I will do his best to lay out in a video tomorrow night. And that should be tonight, if he can sleep. So we hope that he does. And we see right here, it lays out all of this. The SEC cannot and does not attempt to show that any purchaser actually encountered any of the public statements it cites. The public statements on which the SEC relies were made in a variety of forums, among other places in YouTube videos, tweets, and posts on digital asset discussion fora. It says by Ripple on its website and in-person conversations between Ripple personnel and members of the public. When the court looked to extra contractual statements, they looked to the economic inducements held out to the prospect in the form of direct sales pitch. It goes on to say here, extra contractual representations that were not made to the purchaser before the sales were irrelevant. says, had the offer mailed by defendants omitted the economic inducements of the proposed and promised exploration, well, it would have been quite different proposition. Without evidence that many, some, or even any purchasers actually encountered the public statements upon which the SEC relies, the SEC cannot meet its burden of proof. How about that one? And this here, Eleanor Tarrant tonight will be hosting a Twitter Live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time with special guest John Deaton to break down the unsealed summary judgment motions from Ripple and the SEC. I will be there, and I hope you will be too. Looking at the charts right now, because I tell you, there's a lot of buzz out here. A lot of people talking about settlement talks. I mean, how is it that these two entities that can't seem to find common ground filed their summary judgments early in a coordinated effort? Isn't that interesting? XRP peaking its head above 38 cents. We need minimum daily close above 38 cents to attack the 41 and 43 cent level. Makes sense to me too. And I tell you, that's where we are on this day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to leave it right there. Remember, I am not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice from me or anyone else in this video. I'm just sharing my digital perspectives. Check out all the links underneath the video. They're great products and specials that I use each and every day, usually with some pretty great deals in them for you too. So make sure you check them out. I'll catch all of you on the next one.